from Oxford in the UK, and welcome to, I think, the third live stream to celebrate the 20th anniversary of the first release of TiddlyWiki. Thank you, thank you anybody who's joining me, and as I mentioned before, not super experienced with live streams, so would very much appreciate any confirmation that the audio is working correctly as expected. Um, as before, the plan is to welcome some guests to join me who will show some of the things that they've been working on. Um, I am also going to do a couple of demos and myself, and also answer a couple of questions that have been asked. The main one was that Matt, well, a couple of people have asked about the future of TiddlyWiki, and I started talking on yesterday's broadcast about how I see MWS, multi-wiki server, as being the immediate future of TiddlyWiki, and how multi-wiki server takes the functionality that most people at the moment experience in the single file TiddlyWiki configuration, where they're using TiddlyWiki within a browser tab. All the computation takes place within the browser, and then they use one of a number of techniques that TiddlyWiki permits for saving changes. On yesterday's session, we heard from Eric, whose entire and prodigious career working with TiddlyWiki is working on TiddlyWiki in that way. But MWS makes TiddlyWiki into in a way, a much more conventional thing, into an application that you run on a computer, and it runs as a server, and then you connect to it with a browser, either on the same machine or from another machine. That's an architecture that TiddlyWiki, in one sense, sort of rejects, because the central premise of TiddlyWiki existing in its single file configuration is that it's a lot of trouble to set up a server. It's another thing to think about that is troublesome for people who are essentially being their own system administrators and are responsible for their own data. Um, but nonetheless, that's what MWS is. It shows, I think, the potential of the core design of TiddlyWiki when applied in this much more conventional way. Being a conventional application immediately brings a bunch of architectural benefits. It means that the application can be used by multiple people at the same time. It means that the application can be made available on the internet, um, and it, it's um, uh, it's normal for applications of that type, therefore, to offer usernames and passwords and so on, so that it's possible to work with private data on the internet through some kind of authentication and authorization system. So that's quite a big jump for TiddlyWiki, and for TiddlyWiki users who are used to working with single file TiddlyWiki. I recognize that a lot of what I said before is going to be a foreign language, and the benefits to users might not be immediately obvious. Uh, so I thought it would be worth taking a couple of minutes um, doing a demo of MWS, so I can show you what this new functionality looks like at the moment. It's unfinished, but shows you the basic idea. And then I plan to bring in Eric Eric Shulman, as we did yesterday, who is a very eminent TiddlyWiki developer and who's also been working on MWS, and we'll talk together a little bit about MWS. So, let's say being a server means that running running MWS is not the same as just opening a TiddlyWiki HTML file. There's one command you have to type on the command line. And in fact, on every operating system, you can make that one command be a thing that you double click on, or a keyboard shortcut that runs the command automatically. So I'm only sharing one window, but hopefully, if I go here, this is my Chrome window, and having started MWS, I can then access it from any browser. So the way that I started MWS means that other machines on my local network can access it. There's another way of starting it where only my browsers on my own machine can access it, which is obviously the way that you'd expect individuals to use it when running at home. But it's very easy to make it so that it's a one-click operation to install something like TiddlyWiki MWS on an online service like I'll say Vercel, but there's a bunch of online services that allow you to run applications privately in the cloud. So for TiddlyWiki people, it means that one way of working could be that you have in effect your own Tiddly host in the cloud. Tiddly host being very popular online service for running TiddlyWikis. So you can imagine having your own Tiddly host in the cloud, which you log into securely, and which you store all of your wikis. Many people on Tiddly host have dozens and dozens of wikis. MWS supports that too. So the opening page of MWS is a sort of dashboard view, which shows you everything that is on this server. So that you can imagine all of this data. This is the stuff that's stored in the database that TiddlyWiki MWS manages. It's a SQL-like database, and we'll perhaps talk a tiny bit about that later. So as you can see, main thing is a list of wikis, but the other rather baffling thing is a list of bags. So this, poorly explained, is the content model of MWS. We have tiddlers, as you'd expect with TiddlyWiki, and those tiddlers are stored in bags. So, for instance, there's a bag here called docs, and if I click on it, you may recognize a listing of the tiddlers that are present on tiddlywiki.com. And if I click on one of those tiddlers, I see the raw text of the tiddler. So this already is a it shows you an important characteristic of running server applications. And it's this, that the server application responds to URLs. So here you can hopefully see the URL is my local machine, bags, docs, tiddlers, action, delete, tiddler widget. There's four elements. What those four elements do together is identify a bag, which is a container of tiddlers, and a tiddler within that bag. And then it gives me just that tiddler. So you can imagine if TiddlyWiki is a card index system, this is a way of reaching in and grabbing a specific card. But not only me being able to grab it, me also being able to share a link with you so that you can grab it or a later version of it. So within MWS, we've got bags containing tiddlers. Here's another bag that's just got two fairly random tiddlers in it. Um, and we've got wikis. Now, wikis are made of what we call recipes, where a recipe is a list of bags. So here it's saying there's a wiki called docs, and that wiki consists of the bag called docs. So if I click on this, we now see that same collection of tiddlers, but now they've been wrapped up so that they appear as a TiddlyWiki instead of when I clicked on this bag link, I went straight to a what we call a static page. So this is not a TiddlyWiki that just shows you a plain old list of all the tiddlers within the bag. So this the wiki, and you can see here I've jumped to wiki/docs, gives me those same tiddlers but wrapped up into a TiddlyWiki. And then if we look at a more complex example, you can see here that there's, say, for instance, recipe row contains bag beta, bag alpha, recipe sigma contains bag gamma and bag alpha. So let's put something in bag alpha. So I'll create a new tiddler here called MWS demo, and to show off my artistic skills, I'll draw a happy face. Um, and so now that in the has been saved to the server. We know it's been saved to the server because there's a helpful tick there. So I'm going to close that wiki recipe tau, and instead we'll look at these two recipes. So both of these wikis include that bag, and so I can see the same tiddler within them. But say if in recipe row I create a tiddler called row, hello, and that's been saved. Now that's in row, but if I visit Sigma, will not see that same tiddler. Um, and if I go back to bag alpha, um, and for instance, now apply that bad example and create a new tiddler called another demo, um, and then go back to bag sigma and bag row, I should see the in a moment I should see that to another demo that I created in bag alpha, which means it was visible in recipe tau. I should now see that appear both in recipe sigma and recipe row. Uh, so I can speed up the process by getting the changes from the demo from the server immediately. And here, here's the tiddler appearing in both places. So very quick lightning demo, and rather based on more based on principles than showing you why that's useful. So what I would like to do now is welcome Eric Shulman to the chat. Um, Eric, hi. Hopefully you're still there. It looks like your screen's
Let's see.
blank.
Microphone.
It would be great to get feedback if you can hear Eric, and I'm just going to switch over so that we can see Eric too. Um, Here we go. Eric, hi. Welcome.
Hello, how are you?
Very well, thank you, and welcome to I think the third live
Yes.
stream that we're hosting to celebrate TiddlyWiki's 20th anniversary. Thank you very much for joining me. You have, of course, joined me over the years for many very similar live streams, but it's great to be here today after 20 years discussing TiddlyWiki with you. I'm
Indeed.
getting positive feedback from the chat that people can hear you. So I was actually going to, having given you an opportunity to wave, I was going to switch back to my Chrome window and just talk through this a little bit. So, Eric, I mentioned, is a prodigious contributor to the TiddlyWiki community. What that means is that he produces incredible wikis that show off the stuff that he's built. But Eric takes enormous trouble to make sure that those components are reusable. So everything Eric does is designed as components for other people to use. And that really aligns perfectly with the TiddlyWiki philosophy, which is all about sharing. And One of the things that MWS is interesting for, from Eric's perspective, is that MWS is also all about sharing. So we've talked before about a classic configuration would be that you have a bag containing the standard components that you use across all of your wikis, which might contain a whole bunch of stuff that Eric has built. And then for the recipe that you use for your personal notes wiki, your medical notes wiki, your learning music wiki, etc., would all include that bag. Yes, so that was that's of interest to me, I guess, to see how we can enable easier ways for you to share the components that you build.
Yes. One sort of historical observation about multi-wiki server is that the term bags and recipes goes far back in TiddlyWiki history, and one of the best places it was used was in something called Tiddly Space, which was another server-based method of combining different containers of tiddlers in order to produce a running TiddlyWiki on the fly. Um, and the example of how this uh, can be used, as Jeremy said, is let's say you have a number of add-ons that you'd like to use. And so you create a bag which contains those add-ons and their configuration tiddlers and what have you. And then you create a second bag which is for your data tiddlers for the content of your wiki. And you then define a recipe for a particular wiki which incorporates both of those bags. And so then, without having to copy all of those add-ons into each wiki, the wiki that contains both bags sort of inherits the content from the underlying bag, and you can then maintain that bag separately as a separate wiki where you can update your add-ons and reconfigure them and such. And then every other wiki that incorporates that bag then will automatically get those changes on the fly.
Sorry,
And that's a
you've managed a great explanation. I worry that, and we'll get some comments on this hopefully, but I worry that it may still sound like you and I are on a different planet with this stuff. I notice I think part of the challenge here is that with single file TiddlyWiki, the concepts are very concrete. There is a file, you can see it, you can delete it, you can copy it, you can open it and experiment with it. So it's a very concrete metaphor. Whereas here with MWS, we speak of bags and recipes, but there's no concrete thing in quite the same way. Um, I drew a bit of attention to the URL, to what you see in the address bar, and that really is the most concrete thing about web applications. But I hope for people listening who are still struggling to understand what's a bag, what's a recipe, why do I want to use these things? the thing to bear in mind is that it's a very small number of new terms that we've introduced in MWS. You already know what a wiki is. We've introduced the concept of a bag and the concept of a recipe, and there's plenty of good analogies for what those things are, how they are similar to directories, for instance. So hopefully, by repeating, we will through multiple explanations, we will make this stuff clear. I was going to pick up a very prosaic question from Matt, which was about how MWS is started. So here I am screen sharing a TiddlyWiki where I've copied the command that I typed. So this is again just because I'm only sharing my Chrome window and not my terminal window. Uh, and we'll break this down, but that says start Node.js, which essentially is, well, the program that you download onto your computer, just like Chrome. And just like Chrome, it runs JavaScript, but it doesn't pop up any windows. So it just runs within the terminal. I'm running it within the TiddlyWiki directory, so this points to the main entry point of TiddlyWiki. So all of that is just saying run TiddlyWiki, and then the rest of what I typed is being passed directly to TiddlyWiki, and it's TiddlyWiki that is interpreting all of this stuff. And if I was running a different application, it would be interpreted differently. So this is the folder that identifies my wiki. So it's essentially the folder that contains all of the data for the server. So again, I might be able to file share by. I might be able to show you what's in that directory by doing by dragging uh, dragging a Finder folder onto here. Let me try. Um, um, no, forgive me for. Okay, so I think you can see that that's my local file system showing me the local files. The the bit that we were talking about is this, the folder that contains the server. And that's here. So it contains some tiddlers, but actually just literally one configuration tiddler. Uh, and it contains a store folder, which contains a SQLite database file and the attendant necessary bits, and also a folder that contains the attachments. So one of the things that MWS tries to do is to finally have good performance for very large tiddlers. And what that means is with MWS, I want to be able to drag 4 GB video files into MWS from my file system and for that to work. And so there's a mechanism within MWS to do that. So forgive me for a tiny bit of meandering into the details, but hopefully that's in effect, that folder is equivalent to the single file TiddlyWiki itself. It's a location in my file system that contains all my stuff. If I pick up that folder and take a copy of it, I will have taken a faithful copy of all my stuff. So let's just go through the next bits. This is each of these phrases that starts with a double dash is a subcommand executed by TiddlyWiki. So the first one is load plugin bags. What that is that within MWS, it actually incorporates what TiddlyWiki users would recognize as a plugin library. If I opt to show system bags and then do an update, you'll see that suddenly the list of bags is much, much bigger. And there is a bag for each plugin that lives within the TiddlyWiki plugin repository. So that's what that command is doing is because it's optional to load up all those bags, but that's just making all the plugins available to the child wikis. Um, this is running a sequence of commands to create the demo data that you see here. So you were seeing recipe row, sigma, tau, epsilon. That's what creates those things. And then MWS listen is the command that actually kicks off the server and makes it listen to requests from browsers. So a- again, kind of apologies for lots of details there, but that was my eagerness to explain everything. What really matters is that it's a single command that on any operating system you can create as a shortcut or something that you can run with a single key press or a single mouse click. And then once you've done that, once you've got the server running, it's available on any browser on your machine. Um, Eric, come back to you. Sorry, every time I switch back to you, it goes black, which is because I rashly clicked that checkbox, which I've now unclicked. So hopefully it'll stop doing that. Uh, I'm just going to take a couple of questions, and hopefully Eric will be able to help me answer these as well. Matt asks, where is MWS to be stored so it can be accessible by one's devices? On some cloud service or on a local machine in one's basement that is on non-stop? So that's an excellent question. Where do you run MWS? This is a bit reminiscent of single file TiddlyWiki. There are lots of options. The simplest option is indeed to run it in the cloud, and there are free services that can do that. But many people would choose a paid service like Azure or Google or AWS, because then you're a customer and you have the rights of a customer, and the costs of running a small personal server are very, very, very small. Otherwise, Facebook wouldn't exist, if you see what I mean. So a cloud service, absolutely a good answer for a lot of people. Running it on your own machine in your basement is also a great answer, particularly for people who might already have remote access to their home network set up. And many people do just to be able to access files, but that remote access technology would typically allow MWS to be accessed from elsewhere as well. I'm getting a streaming quality warning, which is annoying since I'm not using Wi-Fi and have a huge network cable trailed around the house to try and give me the best possible bandwidth. But there you go. Um, Another really interesting place to run MWS, there's still an answer for Matt, is on your phone. Um, so, in a way, a mobile phone today has almost all of the characteristics of a server of 15 years ago. It's always on. Of course, our mobile phones don't always have connectivity, but they're always with us. The device of last resort. And in fact, even um, if you're running MWS on your mobile phone, if you were off grid, and you had your laptop with you, you can actually connect your laptop to the mobile phone's Wi-Fi and then be accessing MWS from your phone. So that's the model I really like, is to sort of imagine nominally a little pebble in my pocket, carry around with me. as responsible for backing up its data as I am my photographs and everything else on my phone. And if I am on the same Wi-Fi network, my laptop can log into it. So I might be sitting at my desk with my phone in my pocket, working away on MWS. That so it's a good range of ways that you can work. And I imagine, a bit like TiddlyWiki itself, that other useful configurations will emerge. Eric, we're talking about MWS. You're famous for being for sticking with the single file edition, but in fact, of course, I know you do also. I mean, you've used Tiddly Space and other online services. But do you think MWS will be enough to get you running your own TiddlyWiki in the cloud, or are you more likely to have TiddlyWiki running on a Raspberry Pi under your desk?
Ooh, good question. Um, Largely, I don't go anywhere. I'm a bit homebound due to health issues. Um, so for me, I think that running MWS on a local system in my homeland is probably more likely. Um, but I could see um, hosting an MWS to distribute the Tiddly Tools components,
Hmm.
and then inviting other folks to go ahead and create their own wikis in that environment so that they would basically um, uh, um, set up a wiki that basically, like you said, there's bags, recipes, and wikis, and so they would set up a wiki that includes the Tiddly Tools bag, and they wouldn't have to worry about, oh, has Eric done some updates to things,
Yeah,
because they would automatically get
sure,
whatever the
sure.
latest versions of things are, which, hopefully, if I do my job right, that doesn't cause any problems for anybody. But, obviously, there are times
No,
when the
no, that makes
underlying
perfect
code
sense.
changes, and,
Yeah.
it requires a
And we
change
want
in how it's used.
we
So,
want improvements. But one thing to note is that under that way of operating, you would be hosting other people's content. I think where I would very much like to get to is where Eric can run tiddlytools.com as an MWS. The value of doing that would be it'd be read only for everybody else, but you'd be able to log in and write to it. One of the values would be that URL stuff that we saw earlier, that there would suddenly be a definitive URL, not just for Tiddly Tools itself, but for each individual plugin. What we would then need is a way to include content from other servers. So the way that I anticipate doing that is via sync, so that that would mean that, say, if Simon Baird, who runs Tiddly Host, was running an MWS instance, that he would set up a bag that was synchronized from your Tiddly Tools bag and would, each time you made an update to a plugin within a few minutes, it would sync across to Simon's server as well. Um, and that's where I think I'd like to get to. So, because not everybody wants to host content, it's a liability. You never know what material, the legality of material that people are going to try and host. And so that's not necessarily a route that everybody wants to take. I'm going to pause for a second and then ask Eric to pick that up. But I wanted to again welcome everybody who's joined us, and also pick up a couple of questions. I no, actually, no, I think we're good. Um, Everybody's saying the sound's working. That's just what we want to hear. Great. Okay. Eric, let's before Eric carries on with this brief discussion about MWS, to the people in the chat, if I'd hope soon to welcome another guest. The requirement to join me and Eric on the video chat is that you have headphones and that you have a decent video connection. We'll by a decent speed. So Eric, yes, let's go back to MWS. Forgive me for that interjection.
So maybe there's been a lot of bits and pieces mentioned. So perhaps reiterating to summarize, as I see it, there are 5 parts to MWS. There's the underlying Node.js application, which provides the engine for the server to run. There's the TiddlyWiki that contains the MWS plugins, and those two together combine to create an MWS server. And
That's
then
correct.
and yeah,
And worth pointing out, I glossed over that, but the folder that I said was the place where the server is stored, is actually a normal TiddlyWiki wiki server. And we call that the admin wiki, and it can be it turns out with web applications, it is considered very valuable to that the admin interface be a privileged interface that comes in on a separate network interface. That means then that other people installing the application, they can be confident from their network routing tables that none of the people over there are able to access the admin functions, and they don't have to rely on the logic within the application that filters out whether people can perform admin functions. Turns out that that's very important because the IT people can't inspect the application code, but they can inspect their network routing. This is again, as ever, we're talking about arcane stuff, but it is simple if you're used to TiddlyWiki. That in the old TiddlyWiki world, you on the server. You ran a wiki, you opened a wiki, that wiki was made available over the network. The new world of MWS, you still run a wiki, but that wiki is the host of MWS and indeed the means by which it's configured. And again, I should emphasize that what we're talking about here is how you install and configure MWS. And it's completely just as it is possible to use TiddlyWiki today without worrying about a whole load of complexity. Almost none of the stuff we're discussing now is anything that you need to worry about if you're just running MWS in the cloud. Forgive me, Eric. You've got to
no,
2 of 5. I loved the summary, but I'd like
okay.
to.
So the first two is the sort of the underlying substrate on which MWS lives. And again, that's the Node.js and the MWS TiddlyWiki, the admin TiddlyWiki. And then the other 3 are the bags, recipes, and wikis. And so think of bags are basically collections of tiddlers, and recipes are ways of are actually just little tiny snippets. They're not really elaborate things, but they basically combine together a set of bags. It can be one bag, of course, or it can be multiple bags. And then a wiki is an instance of that recipe applied to those bags to generate a running TiddlyWiki instance containing those tiddlers. And one of the interesting things about it is that the recipe, which can contain multiple bags, is a sort of a layered approach that you list the bags that you want, in the order of precedence, so that the first bag is sort of like the underlying, you know, plugins and whatnot, and then the next bag is something that's a layer on top of that. And so the very last bag you can think of as your personal bag, where your individual content tiddlers might live. And so that by layering these bags via a recipe, which is just an ordered list of bags, you can add different pieces together. So you might have a bag containing your, you know, your most loved plugins, and then a bag on top of that that contains a set of configurations for those plugins, and then a bag on top of that which contains your content tiddlers. And then, of course, if you're working with a wiki that has those three bags and you want to change the configuration settings, when you change them, those changes are always placed into the topmost or the last bag in the recipe, which is, you, like I said, you think of as your personal bag, so that whatever you're inheriting from the other bags doesn't get changed by your activities, and all of your so if you override configuration tiddlers that are in one of the preliminary bags, your overridden tiddlers are stored in your primary personal bag, so that other people could then set up a similar recipe with the same underlying plugin bag and configuration bag, and then they would have the sort of common shared setup, um, but they wouldn't get your particular flavor of configuration settings. Um, and so it allows for sort of like a multi-branching kind of thing where you can have a whole bunch of users, each one having a common underlying set of plugins and configurations and even content tiddlers, but then having their own custom content and modifications of those configurations and things as their own layer on top of that. So again, there are five layers. There's Node.js, there's the underlying admin wiki, there's the bags, which are basically collections of tiddlers. There's the recipe, which is a ordered list of how to combine the bags. And then there is the actual wiki, which delivers this all to you as a constructed TiddlyWiki on the fly. And so that's, I just wanted to sort of reiterate that structure. Um, Hopefully, if there was any confusion in this, that might help to elaborate on it a bit more, to sort of reiterate how this all fits together. But it's a very exciting uh, um, bit of kit. And it, as I said before, it goes, to my mind at least, it goes back to the Tiddly space construct, which was done,
Yeah.
oh geez, a long time ago, over 10 years.
2008.
Good Lord, that long ago. And it essentially allows for multiple people to share common components and then have their own individual bits and pieces layered on top of that. So that, for example, you might have one person who's designated as the caretaker of the plugins, and other people would not go and modify those that wiki containing just the plugin bag. But then they would, of course, have their own bags, which would contain their additional custom configurations and such. So And I wonder how many times I've said the word bag in the last 10 minutes.
Yeah, well, I'm not sure. It's not as terrible a name uh, as TiddlyWiki itself, but it may.
Yeah.
Uh,
Essentially the way that, and I'm going to sort of repeat myself. Bags are collections of tiddlers. Recipes are instructions for how to combine those collections of tiddlers. And then the multi-wiki, the wiki that you actually get delivered to your browser, is a combination of the tiddlers in those bags combined according to a recipe to produce a running on the fly TiddlyWiki that you can then interact with. So yeah, that's sort of sometimes it bears repeating because people go, huh?
yeah, no,
And
indeed, indeed.
but
I'm just going to pick up telekinesis. Asked the question: can you load bags of tiddlers to a wiki that is already open in the browser? The easiest way to do that is the way that you've always done it, is via drag and drop. You can just as before, you can drag and drop from any TiddlyWiki different website into your own TiddlyWiki to import those tiddlers. There is also command line options to import tiddlers, so you can write scripts that sort of bulk operate on tiddlers and so
it
on.
it should be noted that whatever you drop into your TiddlyWiki will be saved in your topmost bag, your personal bag. So it won't affect anyone else. So if you want to add additional plugins, you can have them stored in your personal wiki, and other people won't have any idea that they're present.
That's correct.
So you can personalize your particular delivered
Yeah,
wiki. If, on the other hand, you were sort of the designated caretaker of the plugins on a particular MWS site, you might go, instead of going to your personal wiki, you would go to one of the underlying wikis, which have a recipe that doesn't include your personal bag, but just includes the underlying plugin bag. And when you made changes there, everyone would get those changes automatically.
yeah, that's right. I'm going to take another question from Matt. I'm hoping in the background that Hans is trying to join. There's a couple of other people who also put their hands up, and please do get ready to join, which means looking at the instructions that I posted in the forum earlier today. Question was from Matt, and he says Chris Dent had another philosophy focusing on the tiddler rather than the wiki. And that's a great question. Chris Dent is a long time wiki expert sorry, developer who worked on wikis before TiddlyWiki existed, and I was lucky enough to meet and have the opportunity to work with when I was building a team at Osmosoft when BT acquired TiddlyWiki in 2007. And Chris led the development of TiddlyWeb, which began life or was conceived of as a server side for TiddlyWiki. And it was indeed for TiddlyWeb that we came up with the idea of bags and recipes. And surprisingly to me, a kind of reflect the proposal for bags and recipes was kind of trying to do the simplest thing that could possibly work. And how many years later, 16 years later, we haven't come up with anything better. And there are details in there where the bags and recipes model is kind of brutal. It's flat, for instance. A recipe is a list of bags. A bag is not a list of other bags. So I can't, if you include my bag called Jeremy, I can't suddenly change it so that it's something else. and the list of bags that make up a wiki is is fixed. You can't make it have some bags on one day and other bags on another day. So there are lots of areas in which it would be possible to imagine a variant of the bags and recipes architecture that was much more conventionally flexible, more hierarchical, for instance. The obvious one is that recipes could be hierarchical so that you could include recipes inside other recipes. And there's a very good reason why we don't do that, is because we were scared of making something that would be too complicated to understand. All my previous experience in corporate IT is if you ask users what they want, if you ask them to design your system, they will design something that is more complicated and rich than is good for them. And I can be guilty of that myself. So we have a very, very simple model with bags and recipes, and it's survived to this day. As Matt's question says, Chris would always be very focused on the tiddler being the special thing, and couldn't couldn't agree more. TiddlyWiki's primary um, uh, uh, thing is this idea of breaking information up into tiddlers and reusing them. So tiddlers absolutely are central, but the centrality of tiddlers is common ground for all of us that know the single file TiddlyWiki. So when I'm talking here about uh, MWS, um, it's yeah. So there you go. That but Matt has. I'm not sure if that had practical consequences. Is that thing also for MWS? Right. Matt's asking whether there is a philosophical difference of opinion between Chris Dent's design of TiddlyWeb and the present design of MWS, and there is not. This is exactly the same design. There's I learned a lot from working with Chris, and one of those things was to when you make a server application, there's kind of technical considerations of making it respond with the right answer and so on. But the most important thing is to make it webby, which means to implement wisely and carefully the protocols that make up the web. And the web is what we used to say in Osmosoft, the web is agreement. The web is a widespread agreement across a community that servers will behave in a certain way, that HTML files will behave in a certain way. And I've taken that on board now, and that philosophy was embedded in TiddlyWiki 5. So TiddlyWiki 5 has always been a good web citizen that exposed individual tiddlers as web resources, albeit not quite as ambitiously as TiddlyWeb until today, where MWS pretty much does the same thing as TiddlyWeb. Um, Eric, anything you'd like to add to that?
No, I think that says it.
Secret HQ, who I think is Scott, says that MWS mimics the way that he uses TiddlyWiki under Node.js. He's got a couple of TiddlyWiki warehouses, he calls them, containing sets of plugins, style sheets, and other reused tiddlers, which he then includes in other wikis. And Scott's quite right that the ability to share tiddlers within wikis, but between different wikis, has always existed in TiddlyWiki run under Node.js. But it was always fiddly and different techniques for different circumstances, where MWS gives us a much more robust, consistent model for doing that. Mans asks, you have a local bag of plugins. You'd want to update those plugins from e.g. Tiddly Tools. Would you maintain your local plugin bag by re-downloading Eric's plugins? Mans, that question is about sync. So I believe that it's the ability to work offline is important. So that means that if I'm using Eric's plugins, it means I need a local copy of them. It's not enough just to reference them via the URL. And so that means we need a mechanism for pulling content from one instance of MWS into another. Now, in fact, this synchronization ability is so important that I'm actually less interested in the case where you're pulling in from an MWS source and more interested when you're pulling in from something existing, your Mastodon feed or something. But those synchronization abilities are super important. Lots of people want, for very good reason, to have their content stored as individual markdowny files in their file system. And applications, including TiddlyWiki, kind of offer that to people. We say, here's some software where all your stuff is in individual markdown files. That's the master copy. But we, people who make software like that, are kind of lying in a way because you can't use a file system as a database. So you have to have something layered on top of those files. MWS doesn't even pretend to store your stuff in a user accessible way. It stores everything. Contents of all those bags are stored in this database file. SQLite is a very standard database file. It's very easy to take and do other things with it, almost as easy as it is to take TiddlyWiki's HTML file. But it's still a more complex thing. And yet, for many, many users, the ability to have in my Dropbox or iCloud account a folder that's got .tid files for everything I wrote today, recognize that's a really important application. So the answer to that is sync, and MWS will have multiple we'll have a plugin interface so that anybody can write a plugin to help it sync to anything. And as part of the core, we will ship the important synchronization destinations, which would be things like the file system. Man's follow-up part of his question was essentially right that yes, the intention is that it will automatically pull in those updates. Um, Scott asks, how does MWS handle changes in the underlying bags? When I update tiddlers in my tiddler warehouse, I have to stop and restart the TiddlyWiki instances that include them. How would that work in MWS? Well, Scott, exactly. You're going to an absurd amount of trouble, and I mean not absurd, but a almost unacceptable level of trouble to make that work. It's stunning that even TiddlyWiki as it exists today can support your use cases in that way. With MWS, you'll change any change to a bag will automatically ripple through to all of the wikis based on recipes that include that bag. The TiddlyWiki has always tried to do that kind of automatic updating. It currently does it via polling, which means if you make an update in one tab, it'll take tens of seconds for the update to appear in another tab. And one of the goals of MWS is to make that essentially instantaneous, which would then mean that it's possible to, for instance, do things like a chat application where Eric and I are both creating tiddlers in the same bag, and we just have a list of them in reverse chronological order, and that's our chat application. Um, uh, Justin says, um, it, and then got to follow that. Is this all administered by Node.js in a GitHub-like way? Um, it, uh, uh, it, it's the way that you administer MWS is through Node.js commands. But the goal is that the only command that you'll care about 99.9999% of the time is the command that starts MWS, and then you will do everything through the browser, which will feel a lot like using TiddlyWiki today. Hans mentions that he's very busy with work, so may not be able to join us. Peter asked about the mobile app. So I touched on the mobile app later that I had made an announcement over the summer, I think, that very exciting to me that I've always wondered about building what it would be like to build an app for the iPad, iPhone. I'm an iPhone, iPad user myself, and so it's kind of useful for me to have TiddlyWiki on those devices. And writing an app myself for those platforms, I've always been a bit wary of because people I know who write for a living iPhone or iPad apps don't necessarily have an easy time of it. Um, there's um, there's can I say what if you build iPhone apps or iPad apps, you're a little bit under Apple's control. So I've always been worried about investing a large amount of time in building an iPhone or iPad app that would then perhaps later be life gets difficult because of actions um, that Apple have taken. Um, uh, but the thing I discovered in the summer that really changes everything is that you can run Node.js on an iPad or an iPhone. And so that meant with really a very small number of days of work, I was able to get standard TiddlyWiki running on as an iPhone, iPad app. I then hit a blocker in the quest to try and make MWS work, which is a tiny bit more challenging than plain TiddlyWiki. But I have got plain TiddlyWiki running as an app, and if there's any interest, I could do a demo of that screen sharing from an iPad and show you how that works. So that app does have exactly the characteristics we were talking about earlier. This idea that you'd treat your iPhone or iPad as your kind of personal vault. Everything that you care about is on the device. You'd run the app to interact with your data and also to make it available to other devices on the same network. So, for instance, in a classroom setting, if you were at the front of the class and there's a whole bunch of people who are all on the same Wi-Fi network, who are with a laptop, they can access your server just by typing it into the address bar of their browser. So I'm still very excited about that. Got this small technical block, which I also haven't been able to spend that much time on. You know, there's yeah, there's a lot of demands on all of our time, I'm sure. But I do hope to get over that block and uh, basically, for me, it will be a matter of mostly working and thinking about MWS, but to the side, being able to offer MWS as a super easy to use download from the App Store application. Um, and Mario asks about performance of MWS. What's the performance like with many bags and tiddlers? And the, uh, the one answer to that, of course, is that we'll have to run lots of tests and see. But SQLite itself is super efficient, and SQLite's developer docs include a lot of discussion about how it can be used to make really astonishingly high performance applications that run on relatively unsophisticated hardware. SQLite, I've loved working with it. So it's just one file of C source code and it implements a very competent version of SQL, and it's incredibly robust and is widely used by literally the entire industry. In the case of Apple devices, almost every system file that you look at is actually a SQLite database. Um, so that part of it, SQLite, I believe, TiddlyWiki's performance at the moment is bound by how fast a JavaScript engine can run, and SQLite is native code. And without going into too many technical details, it's basically a compiler for, and it compiles queries that you write into pretty fast native code. So there's reason to think that kind of SQLite is getting on for as fast as it could be. I don't want to make claims. Um, Claims that I can't back up, but the industry is so dependent on SQLite that for us as a community to trust SQLite seems very easy. Um, Matt asks, how ready for use is MWS? Under development, and occasionally we push code that is broken. So it's, I think that as an experimenter, download it tomorrow, give it a go. There's a link to the pull request in the forum, and I possibly should refine the usage instructions to make it a bit clearer, but it really is three steps from being at a random Windows or Mac computer to running MWS. And those steps as easy as they could be. There's nothing complicated or scary, and it's a great time to experiment with it. Uh, MWS is not yet at a point where you could rely on it, but that's a tricky statement because I do rely on it already every day. So it's more that you should treat it with caution until it's a bit more proven. But software, open source software, the deal is that we recognize software gets better the more people that use it. And so, whilst we recognize there is a state where software isn't ready, if we allow the fact that software isn't ready to discourage people from using it, then it never becomes ready. So, Matt, if you have any curiosity, now is a great time to install it. Thomas says, will I be able to export any MWS wiki to an individual HTML file? And the answer to that is yes, that indeed, if I go back to screen sharing Chrome here, um, we unclose a few. Here's here's my list of wikis. If I say that docs wiki, if I click on it, I see, as we saw before, a TiddlyWiki with all those documentation tiddlers folded in. If I just say save link in Chrome, not sure which bits of this you'll be able to see, probably not all of it. It saved the file, and now I can hopefully open the file. Uh, Finish downloading it. So there we go. So now I can open the file. So this is looking at that wiki as a downloaded local file. And so it does have issues about images, but that's because I only downloaded a single file and I didn't download all the images. So that's to say that it's kind of a weird way of thinking about server applications, that the exporting a wiki as an individual file, that HTML file is sort of there all the time. You just need to type the URL into a browser to conjure that unique HTML file into existence. And That's a very different way of thinking about things. But as you start to make that transition from, TiddlyWiki is one little knob of code running in one place that you can ask to do stuff, as you move from that model to a model of thinking in terms of URLs, which show you different stuff on that server, you'll see that a lot of things that used to be operations that you'd click buttons for are now um, uh, there all the time, just by, say, conjured into existence as soon as you type the URL. Um, uh, Matt, that was Thomas's question. Thank you, Thomas. Man says, how much overhead goes into having a multi-user system for MWS? As usual, I'm interested in using wikis with a classroom full of potentially hacking teenagers. Man, that's a fabulous application, and we should collectively take the challenge of making a system that your kids can't hack. And yes, that's absolutely the kind of application I'm really interested in. There's a way that TiddlyWiki is often used is what I think of as in broadcast mode, as well. There's one person who might be pulling in information from a few other sources, and then they're publishing a TiddlyWiki that is used by a broader community. And you see that pattern quite often, surprisingly. And it's kind of like the asymmetry between there's fewer people author write stuff for the web than read stuff, and their needs are different. And so the attraction, I think, for authors in TiddlyWiki is that they can build their own environment for authoring their stuff, but also they can build a potentially different environment for how other people experience it. And that's really the essence of a classroom application, is there being a custom application that you use as a teacher whilst you're preparing and reviewing material, perhaps a different application that you use in the classroom on the projector, and then a third different application that each student uses for their own experience of the material. And we accomplish that through this bag and recipe mechanism. So in the classroom situation that you're talking about, Mans, there would typically be a bag of the gubbins that keeps everything working, the plugins and configuration that you're using, a bag of the teacher material that you're sharing with the class, and a bag for each member of the class in which you put their specific assignments. It like everything, it rapidly can get more complicated because you might, for instance, you might want to separate the teaching material from the application that the teacher uses for working on that material. They might go in separate bags. And again, plus the motivation might be reuse, that you might be working on two courses for two different sets of students, and you need that level of sharing between them. So Scott asks, he says, if I'm understanding correctly, the admin wiki and your other wikis are all run under the same instance of Node.js under MWS, which allows for seamless updating through the MWS. But that's right, Scott. The mentioning the admin wiki is kind of probably going into more detail than is needed a lot of by most people most of the time. But it's, TiddlyWiki has this idea that everything is a tiddler, everything is a wiki. So managing an instance of MWS requires a place where you configure which recipes and bags you want, and the user interface for doing all of that. So that's that's why our admin wiki exists. And the fact that we can reuse an existing mechanism is, all open source software projects are trying to do something with a fraction of the staff, that we used to have in commercial environments. Um, uh, Got saying if we're including from a different MWS, I imagine we still have to refresh our own instances to pull in changes in the others. Um, so this is about syncing from other servers. As I say, I think pulling in Eric's plugins from his server, I would think of as a bit of a special case of a much more general need to pull in the latest data from NASA, pull in the latest polling data, I don't know, just pulling in data from elsewhere on the web. And generally, the lowest common denominator way to pull data from the web is exactly as you say, is a sort of manual refresh where either by clicking a button or on a timer, you go and see, is there a new copy of this data? And if there is, pull in the new copy. But there are nowadays some more sophisticated protocols like ActivityPub that could also be used. And when we say existing protocols, that also means existing JavaScript libraries that we could reuse. So it's not necessarily an overwhelmingly complicated thing that enable real-time or near real-time sync. TiddlyWiki has said as part of MWS, I hope to offer near real-time sync between the browser and the server. And it is on my mind that much of that could be reused for syncing between servers, but that hasn't been a big focus for me at the moment. But generally, I absolutely recognize that synchronization is the heart of a lot of the familiar functionality that people need with TiddlyWiki. Um, and Earl, who I'm not sure, I don't think Earl's name's not familiar, but Earl comes in with a great question that really encourages me. I have always thought that TiddlyWiki's filter language would be great as an alternative to SQL. And thank you for the question, Earl. I TiddlyWiki 5's filter language was something that I came up with at the tail end of working with Osmosoft. Um, and we made a partial implementation of, I think, a very similar filter language as part of the work we did there. Um, it again started out, I'm scared of designing things, so it started out as the simplest thing that could possibly work. And as it grew, as the filter language grew, I've always been kind of embarrassed by it because I can be embarrassed by it because it's a big, complicated thing that's hard to relate to other things. It's a learning hurdle for people. Um, but I've come to realize that actually TiddlyWiki's filter language is pretty good. Joe Armstrong, the co-inventor of Erlang, who was a huge TiddlyWiki fan, sadly passed away 5 years ago. He loved the filter language. He said, Jeremy, you've invented the monad, which I was very thrilled with because I had no idea what a monad was. But I can see now that I've now seen other languages that have this chaining ability that TiddlyWiki has, TiddlyWiki filter language has, and actually how important it is that unlike a function call, filter operators are run in the order that they're written. So I now think it's not so terrible. But to go back to your question, Al, in MWS, part of the functionality will be, is not yet, but will be the ability to query a bag with a filter. So at the moment, TiddlyWiki running in the browser gets the entire contents of the bag and then it runs its filters locally. But I want to be able to run the filters on the server. Uh, and I intend to do that by compiling TiddlyWiki's filter language to SQL. Over the last year, I've done a lot more work with SQL, and it's a bit clearer in my mind now how it is. just another programming language. And as the question notes, not that dissimilar from TiddlyWiki's filter language. And I've done enough experiments to be very confident that we can indeed compile TiddlyWiki filters to SQL. Um, Matt says to continue on Mans's question, could it be made so that Chromebooks use it and it disables the individual machines from communicating with one another, which is needed for assessment situations? Yes. Matt's saying, can I make a wiki with a bunch of stuff that I can share with a bunch of individual um, users in the classroom, and that they can write their stuff, click on things, start things, whatever, but that students' activities are invisible from one another. And yes, that absolutely. So let's say we might have a teacher bag, have a bag for student alpha, a bag for student beta, and a bag for student gamma. And then we make a recipe for each of those students, which just includes their own bags. And so then, if the security is set up correctly, authorization, so that students can only access their own bags, you would get what you want. That students would be completely invisible to each other. They would just see material stemming from the teacher. Um, uh, so I think one thing that I think is we talked a lot about bags and recipes, how complex they are, but we hopefully you're already beginning to see how there's a wide range of applications that can quite easily be modeled as bags and recipes. We started talking about how m- me or Scott, for I think we take Scott's questions as an example, how an individual might manage their own stuff into bags so that they can interact with different slices of their material at different times. And these questions about classroom applications start to explore what happens in a multi-user situation, and particularly an asymmetric one. So I quite like about it's easy to imagine a room for three people who know each other really well to do stuff together, but a classroom is a much more structured environment where you need to be able to restrict and control what individuals do. Um, uh, and Mans follows up with that he used to host their own copy of Tiddly Space years ago, but lost control of the server. Well, hopefully, Mans, now would be a good time to start running an instance of MWS. I, the more interest there is from other people in running MWS, the more incentive there is for me to make any changes that make it easy for you to operate with it. So, thinking there about, I don't know, upgrade, making it easy to upgrade, that kind of thing. Um, Earl says, I've seen people want to turn TiddlyWiki into a database, but I want to be able to use filter language in any database. Yeah, and I'm with you. Earl, love that comment. I have had to learn to use SQL recently, and I'm much more comfortable with databases than I used to be. But I I also feel that my recent experience with databases has kind of confirmed what I thought when I was ignorant about, or more ignorant about databases, which is that there's a big barrier to using a database. Sorry, so for any project to be able to apply a database to it, you need to be at a level of formality that can be quite hard to manage. Running a database or designing a database requires you to think ahead in a way that is almost impossible for humans. Where TiddlyWiki encourages a way of working that's really antithetical to that. TiddlyWiki is built around human brains. My interest in my field of software, um, there are endeavors that are limited by all kinds of things. Some people's work is limited by the speed of light. But I'm interested in where software wraps itself around humans. And humans aren't going to change. Humans' capabilities have stayed the same for thousands of years. Software is going to continue to improve, but how we relate to users is bounded by the intellectual capabilities of humans, which are unlikely to change that much. And TiddlyWiki tries to recognize that humans are, well, I'm not sure these are the right words, but we're messy, floppy, disorganized things. And the data that we deal with, the things that we're interested in, are messy, floppy, and disorganized, and sometimes wrong and mistaken. And we manage all of that stuff as part of our everyday lives very easily. But these are qualities that carry over to when we start trying to do things with computers. So, for instance, TiddlyWiki tries to make it as easy as possible to get data in it. You can pretty much drag anything into a TiddlyWiki. You can always press the new Tiddler button and just start typing stuff. So we recognize that just getting stuff onto the computer is often a challenge. And then TiddlyWiki tries to help you make sense of that information afterwards. Um, Matt asks if MWS has anything to do with federation. And the answer to that is yes, everything. So again, I'll give a tiny bit of background, forgive me. That federation in a TiddlyWiki context dates back to, I think, about 2016, when we had the idea that, um, not a unique idea at all, but the idea of a slightly different way of handling classic social media applications. So let's say that me and Matt have an interest in common and we want to discuss it. But in the federation model, instead of there being a shared server that we both go to talk to exchange messages. Instead, I have a server, I have a wiki, and Matt has a wiki. And when I want to say something to Matt, I create a tiddler tagged Matt. And then Matt's wiki, which is paying attention to my wiki, sees the server tagged Matt and pops up a big red thing saying, "Oi, Matt, you've got a message from Jeremy." And then it continues. Matt can leave a message, can reply to my message by creating a tiddler on his wiki, which then makes its way to my wiki. So we've always the interest in that model is that it it means that you host your own stuff and you grab other people's stuff from their server when you need to. So that is attractive to people because there's a certain sort of independence there. And there's the complete absence of a shared resource. All that is required is an agreement about the protocol. And the protocol here would be how our two servers see those changes and how I tag something for Matt's attention and vice versa. So that's the idea of federation. Um, TiddlyWiki in its single file configuration, federation's hard because federation requires going out to the internet to grab stuff from other people's servers. Single file TiddlyWiki suffers at the hands of browser restrictions that make that really quite hard. But we figured out a way to make it work, and Matt was part of a bunch of experiments to make it work. However, we didn't get traction. And I think now it's much easier to see why that over the last few years, federation has become a mainstream thing through ActivityPub and Mastodon, which it really have taken that idea of making a making social media not from a single server that everybody goes to, but from a mesh of servers that cooperate via a protocol. And Mastodon has done quite well, but it's not a shadow on Twitter. So I think where we are in the industry as a whole is a recognition that federation is interesting, might help, but also a recognition that in practice it's a little bit hard. It's substantially harder to use than centralized systems. Um, and it turns out that the kind of social issues, moderation issues that you get with centralized social media don't really go away when you have federated social media. So, so Matt, that was saying that federation within our industry is a work in progress, and it is uncertain whether it's the answer. Um, you asked about federation with MWS. The synchronization process that I described would also support federation. So this is the synchronization process whereby Eric stores, uploads an updated copy of one of his plugins to his MWS server. And then your MWS server is synchronizing Eric's. And so when it sees that there's been an update, it pulls it down, and you now have a copy of that update. So that same mechanism will absolutely support the federation applications that I opened with. This idea of on my MWS server, I write tiddlers. Some of them are tagged for Matt. If Matt is listening to me, he'll see those tiddlers, and and then he can reply again if I'm listening to him. Uh, so yes, a great question from Matt, and I guess yeah, for me working on TiddlyWiki, what I'm trying to do is respond to feedback. I spent some time looking. We did it very briefly on the call yesterday, but I looked at feedback at those very early blog posts about TiddlyWiki. Right at the beginning, the feedback was TiddlyWiki would be great if you could save changes. And I valiantly worked to deliver that. And likewise, since then, everything that I've added to TiddlyWiki has been a result of listening to what users want and trying to distill user requirements. I try and get a multiplicity of user requirements that are expressed differently and might apparently not be the same, and try and come up with components or primitives or mechanisms that will satisfy all of them. And MWS is very much that. The making TiddlyWiki be a server application rather than a single file application, so it opens the door to it can then do everything that you're familiar with from other web applications. And it turns out to be an efficient way of offering so many of the capabilities that people have asked for. You know, when you talk about single file TiddlyWiki, people say, how many tiddlers can I put in there? How big can it go? And we have these fun discussions about 100 megabyte TiddlyWikis. But MWS takes that further. So I very specifically, I want to be able to drag and drop MP4 videos, which are the videos that work on the web, into MWS to be able to write a wiki that organizes and remixes those videos and does it all seamlessly without me having to think that a 2 gigabyte video tiddler is any different than a tiddler containing 100 words that I've written. Matt asks, would you say that you have any particular vision for federation in terms of how it would be implemented and other aspects? As I said, now where I am, is thinking that my job is building this primitive that I'm referring to as synchronization, and that by providing synchronization, I will allow myself or other people to build federation applications as an example of the kind of thing, or I should say social media federation applications as an example of the kind of thing that can be accomplished with sync. So I hope if the ideal path forwards is as I am working on these synchronization features that there will be users in the community who are interested in federation, who are working alongside, who are working alongside each other with them, trying out, trying out building federation on top of these primitives. And as to say, basic federation ain't that hard. If you can see my tiddlers and I can see your tiddlers, it's just establishing conventions for what we should each look at. Matt, look at any tiddlers tagged Matt and dated in the last 24 hours. So you come up with filters for what's interesting. Um, I also noticed that Matt's question, he mentioned specifically Chromebooks. And yeah, uh, it's really important to me that TiddlyWiki runs on rubbish old machines. I'm lucky. I have a nice computer. I'm an old person. I care about computers, and so it matters to me to have a good computer. Um, but if I want to play a game with, I don't have six grandchildren, but if I had six grandchildren and I wanted to play a game with them, I wouldn't necessarily have six decent computers. So even though what I'm trying to say is even people with good computers in their lives occasionally have to make do with much, much, much less capable computers. It's very valuable to me that TiddlyWiki runs well on old computers, will run well on rubbish old Chromebooks that might not run more demanding, might not run more demanding applications. Uh, and that also holds for the server. So I don't, we talked about running MWS on a phone and so on, but a really attractive thing is to run MWS on a Raspberry Pi with a memory card. So that's like £50, and for a really kitted out one with a case. And an extraordinary thing about servers now is that servers as I know them, the servers that used to run applications like MWS 15 years ago, um, uh, that level of power is now available at a very low cost. And the servers in the cloud are absurdly powerful machines now. So, what I'm trying to say is that enough compute power to run TiddlyWiki is astonishingly within reach. Uh, Hopefully for everybody at very low cost. I always emphasize how important it is to me that TiddlyWiki be universally useful. So I'd like if we're collectively going to go to all this trouble to work on TiddlyWiki, let's make it work for as wide an audience as possible. And sometimes uh, it's quite hard to hold that line on in the developer community of TiddlyWiki. There is an enormous pressure to move to a more recent dialect of JavaScript. And it's very understandable why. It's kind of, would you rather live in the black and white 1930s or the full color 1990s? It's kind of, it makes quite a big difference to people within that environment, whether you're in an old-fashioned environment or a modern environment. It's very understandable that developers would really want to be working in the newer environment. But the impact of those decisions on every other user is what I'm really conscious of. But if I am very hesitant to trade off my kind of marginal daily comfort against TiddlyWiki going from running on 100% of the computers in this room to only running on 60% of them. So those are all aspects of universality that are important to me. Um, I thank you everybody for all of the questions. If I've missed any uh, if I've missed any questions, please do repeat them. And I will just say that thank you again to everybody who's joining me on this third live stream to celebrate TiddlyWiki's 20th anniversary, a whole 20 years of TiddlyWiki. And I know I TiddlyWiki exists today and has survived for those 20 years thanks to the community. I mentioned I was reviewing old blog posts and so on from the launch of TiddlyWiki. And uh, a few things struck me that within a couple of days there were adaptations of TiddlyWiki. So 20th of September, I launched TiddlyWiki with no backend, no ability to save changes. 24th of September, Patrick Curry launched PHP TiddlyWiki, which was a gloriously simple but very effective hack to get TiddlyWiki saving itself back to a PHP server. Um, so that was my experience almost immediately of TiddlyWiki. Was it felt like I was working on this workbench with this stuff in front of me, and then people would other people looking over my shoulder were able to reach across and help me. And it was really humbling and um, kind of thought provoking. And I guess ever since then, my journey with TiddlyWiki has also included trying to understand this way of working together and to make the most of it. Uh, um, any other questions? Do please fire away in the chat. Um, I'm uh, we could just checking my whether there's anything else that we might want to touch on now. Um, sorry, Mario, quite rightly is saying, don't forget to like the stream. And yeah, that's what you're supposed to say on live streams, isn't it? Click the subscribe button, press the like, and I should be playing an animated GIF at that point. Um, Let me just have a quick look at some other things that we might have a quick look at. Um, I Forgive me getting myself ready. Uh, okay, I forgive me for not very thrilling part of the stream whilst I was just typing. Um, I was just preparing another demo, um, and it was to talk very briefly about something I've been working on um, for a year and a bit, I guess, I don't know, quite a while anyway. It's the Geospatial plugin. So this is kind of an obvious thing that TiddlyWiki should have. It's the ability to display data on a map. And the map works in the time-honored fashion like Google Maps. If I There are little markers on the map, and I can zoom in to those markers, and I can do a little bit more here. We can see that each marker is actually a tiddler. And so this one that represents the city of Oxford, where I am today, has a latitude and longitude, and a caption, also an altitude, which weirdly is part of the geospatial world. And by virtue of being tagged geomarker, that's making that tiddler appear as a marker on the map. If I go to the plugin itself, there's a number of demos that show its full capabilities. Um, so uh, this is the simplest example of making a map, um, where you just provide a tiddler that contains the map state. So I can view that tiddler here, and you can see that as I zoom in, the zoom level and the latitude and longitude have changed. And indeed, if I change those tiddlers, then the map would change to respond. I can have an individual marker displayed with this geo layer widget. And so you can see here that I'm pulling in the Oxford tiddler, but you can see how that's done. I'm pulling in all tiddlers with that tag geo marker, and then making what we call a geo layer with that latitude, longitude, and color. We can do the same thing with features, which is to say a feature um, is a polygon overlaid over the map. Um, and we, it's going to jump ahead. We can also make markers that can be moved around. So here, this marker is, I think, on Oxford, but I can drag it to Scotland. And if I'd open the tiddler, you can see that the corresponding tiddler has changed accordingly. Um, so uh, these those basic mapping capabilities are kind of the bread and butter of an application, but you might also need to do computations. So, for instance, we've got operators that can compute the distance between multiple places on a map. We've got operators that can perform operations on those polygons. So here we've got a polygon representing one rectangle, polygon representing another, and then you can see here that we're automatically creating the intersection of those two polygons. So that stuff is the ability to make a map that shows the area within which you can drive. You've got a less than 30-minute drive to work and a 20-minute drive home. So that capability, um, this is a great example, I think, of TiddlyWiki providing low-level primitives that enable a class of applications. We don't, TiddlyWiki, I didn't invent these primitives. These are all off the shelf open source libraries, something called OpenStreetMap that provides the maps, and a number of other libraries, Leaflet that provides the geospatial computations. But by integrating them into TiddlyWiki, we then enable uh, TiddlyWiki users who are comfortable with Wikitext to be able to write kind of complex applications that would otherwise um, require custom programming. Um, uh, Scott says, how do you see the single file version and MWS coexisting in TiddlyWiki's future? Might users in 2029 be downloading an exe to set up their TiddlyWiki or a zip file with components? Well, really, Scott, nothing actually changes because TiddlyWiki Classic was just an HTML file. And that was the only way that it could run. TiddlyWiki 5 has always been able to run both within the browser and under Node.js. And the Node.js instantiation of TiddlyWiki really um, is the deepest one because it generates the single file edition. So the single file, the Node.js configuration of TiddlyWiki really can be seen as the build system for building the single file edition. So there's no conflict. They're both things. TiddlyWiki single file edition needs to exist to satisfy users' needs. The Node.js configuration really with TiddlyWiki 5 was brought into existence because it was the easiest way to make the build tools for TiddlyWiki. Um, I think in the future, I would expect, obviously, there'll be some number of TiddlyWiki single file users who will stick with a single file and will never change. I think almost every TiddlyWiki user who chooses to adopt MWS, whether that's logging into a server that somebody else runs or running their own server, I think all of them will actually be using single file TiddlyWiki as part of that experience, because part of what makes, say if my dinosaur hunting club has an MWS server, one of the things that makes it attractive or a lower barrier for me to contribute to that server is that I know I can save the stuff I contribute to a single file on my own computer and it'll work forever, and I can import tiddlers from that HTML file into other wikis. So the use case for storing wikis on your own computer as files that have some confidence that you'll have them forever. None of that changes really. MWS is for single file users. It's a glorious way of slicing and dicing your single file wikis, but your experience of using TiddlyWiki, whether it's MWS or the single file wiki, is the same. It's a blob of JavaScript running in a browser tab. So it's funny, isn't it? I feel like it's from my point of view, thinking about the software architecture, that these two environments feel the most similar. So for me, the single file edition, the MWS edition, it's literally the same code. It's the same thing. I think of it as the same animal crawling around, just in night and day. But from another perspective, from a user's perspective, these are incredibly different things. Um, but Scott's question was, might users be downloading an exe to set up their TiddlyWiki? They kind of already are. You just do npm install TiddlyWiki, a single command, and that does the effective equivalent of downloading an exe that is TiddlyWiki. So I guess in the future we will continue to support all of these different modalities. And as I say, the fact that they're not that different from my perspective working on the software means that it's not. expensive to support all of them. It's just what TiddlyWiki does. Um, uh, and Mario points out that it is TiddlyWiki 5 under Node that is actually the build system for TiddlyWiki Classic, and that is indeed it was a fun and important thing for me. I wanted to make clear when I started working on TiddlyWiki 5 that I wasn't that wasn't the end of TiddlyWiki Classic. And so by making TiddlyWiki 5 be the TiddlyWiki Classic build system, that was a way of kind of affirming that. Um, okay, I'm we're coming up for the couple of hours, so I'm going to draw to a close in the next few minutes. Um, uh, do please fire away any questions in the chat. And if you miss the chance to do that, please don't worry, but post questions to the forum thread or to the video on YouTube, and I will over these next few sessions try and get to every question that we've had. Um, uh, and let's say thank you again to everybody for joining me. Um, I hope this format is working for you. The great thing is that we may not get a million simultaneous viewers whilst we're streaming, but these videos are available for people to watch afterwards, and we have been clocking up significant views after the event. So I hope that this is useful for other people. Keep those MWS questions going. We established when I was talking about it at the beginning that this really is the future for TiddlyWiki. So it's a great time to talk about that. Um, but I should draw to a close and say thank you again to everybody for joining me. I really appreciate your participation, your interest and enthusiasm for TiddlyWiki and willingness to work with me on it has changed my life, and I'm incredibly grateful to everybody who's joined me on this journey. So, with that, I should say goodbye. Many thanks. And tomorrow we're having another live stream, which I'm doing them at different times of day in the hope that that will give people in different time zones opportunities to join. But at 1 p.m. UK time, which I think I can work out as being 30, 12, 13, 14, 15 hours from now. So not very long. I shall see you again in the same place. Thank you again to everybody. And actually, before we close, just saw a comment pop up from Earl. Another comment that I emphatically agree with. I'd encourage everyone to make their own TiddlyWiki videos, particularly workflow videos, and that's quite true. The When people join the video chat, it's been great for to get them to share and show us their stuff. But you don't need to wait for a hangout. You can just start screencasting yourself and share a video. And I would also join Earl in encouraging everybody to do that.